So today we'll be taking a look at a new toy I've bought, which is this camera gimbal. This is the G6 Plus from FeiyuTech, and while it's not a super high-end gimbal, it's the cheapest gimbal I could find that would support an actual camera rather than just a smartphone or an action camera. So while it's not the cheapest thing in the world, this is still pretty good value at around £250. So for a gimbal that can hold a mirrorless camera, that's really good. It won't take any sort of big SLRs, but it'll take mirrorless cameras, compact cameras, action cameras and smartphones, as long as they're under 800 grams, which is pretty good, and that'll easily take my Sony a6000 camera that I'm filming with here. And I thought it'd be quite a fun thing to have. I don't do that much handheld camera work, but sometimes I do have to do it, especially if I'm filming larger projects. When I'm holding the camera in my hand, it wobbles around all over the place. It's got optical image stabilisation, but it's not great, so this should be a massive advancement. Plus it's a fun toy to play with. So yeah, at £250 this is a very good value gimbal for being able to take a mirrorless camera. Of course, no idea how good it is, so let's take a look at that now. So what I'll do is I'll do a quick unboxing, take a look at what you get, and then I'll be doing a full review. So if you're not interested in the unboxing side of things, feel free to skip ahead, but let's take a look. So this is the box. This is entirely Chinese writing, although I did buy a Chinese import, which was a bit cheaper. Now of course bear in mind with that the risk is that you don't have any sort of warranty and stuff like that. But I'd wonder if you buy it from a UK seller you might actually get English writing on it, but I'm sure we'll figure it out even if it is all in Chinese. So yeah, you can save money if you buy the Chinese import ones because it is a Chinese company, but just bear in mind you probably won't get any warranty with that, so sort of do that at your own risk. Let's take it out and see what we get. I've never used any sort of gimbal before, so I'll be really interested to try this out and see how good it actually is. So let's get it out. Because that's cool, so the box is a little bit flimsy, but you actually get a carrying case. That's really nice. Because this is the sort of thing I'm not going to use all the time, I want to be able to pack it away, and having a case to keep it is actually really nice rather than having to keep it in a flimsy box. And let's see what we get. Those got wee handles well, you can carry it about. Ooh, that looks surprisingly more professional than expected. So what I'll do is I'll do a quick run through of what you get in the box, bearing in mind I've not seen this before, so this will very much be my first impressions. And then I'll come back once I've used it for a bit, and I'll show how it all works and do some tests. But I quite like filming my first impressions because you get to see how I actually find it for the first time. So let's see what we've got. So a wee box here. See what this is. Oh, that is various things falling out. So that is a GoPro action camera mount, so you can just pack that. So it's just a standard tripod mount, so that's just so you can fit a GoPro onto it, so that's quite good. So a couple of little thumb screws to go into tripod mount, that's probably for other fixings. You've got a micro USB cable, I'm guessing that's to probably charge it and maybe for firmware updates. That's all that's in that wee box. Next up you get the battery. So this is a bare lithium cell and it's a 26650, 5000 milliamp hours at 3.6 volts. So obviously that'll go inside it, and they rate this to have 12 hours battery life, which is really good. Now that's going to very much depend on how much you're moving it around, how balanced the camera is and stuff like that, to depend on how stressed the motors are. But 12 hours battery life is really good, so I'll be interested to see what you actually get. The only thing I'm thinking with this is because this is just like a bare lithium cell and not any sort of battery pack, I'm wondering how you'll be able to take this on flights. Now imagine if it's inside the gimbal you'll be fine, but I know they can sometimes be a bit funny taking, well you wouldn't be able to take it in hold luggage, and in hand luggage I think they can be a bit funny about taking bare lithium cells. I might be wrong on that, but I might need to worry about getting like a case or something if I was to buy extra cells for this. But that's fine, I don't plan on travelling with it much, in worst case I stick it in the device and it'll be okay. But yeah, that's the battery you get there. Actually that's a good point actually with this as well. It's also, because it's a standard 26650 lithium cell and not some sort of proprietary FeiyuTech battery, you could buy replacements, you don't have to worry about getting a special replacement many years down the line. You can actually just buy off the shelf ones from different manufacturers, so that's actually a good sign. Next, take a look at some accessories, just quickly. I'll get to the gimbal in a second. So there's a wee envelope. Oh, hello. Then instructions, which on mine, yes, they're in English on the back as well. Cool. Yep, so you get batteries with English as well. That's not batteries, instructions with English as well. That's good. Final thing is whatever this bit of paper is, which is just another sort of manual or app setup guide. We'll do that later. We'll cover that in the video. And finally, we have the gimbal itself. Oh, a wee box of accessories where you get whatever this is. Oh, that's nice. So the gimbal itself has a tripod mount for screwing into a camera, but this is a smartphone mount, so you can put a screw it onto a tripod there and clip a smartphone in. And this thing is really good quality. I mean, obviously it's an expensive device, but this is fully metal. So, I mean, you don't even need to use this with the gimbal. It'll work on selfie sticks, normal tripods, everything. And I've got some of these lying around, but this is the best quality one I've ever felt. It's fully metal. This is actually really quite cool. And you can clip a smartphone into that. That is really nice. And if the quality of that's anything to go by, I'm really excited to see the gimbal. So that's it there. Now this feels, yep, really nice. Obviously it's not switched on, so it's just flopping around all over the place. But you've got a nice rubber anti-slip thing here. Bottom screws off for a battery to go in. You then got a little tripod mount there. You've got a little joystick there to control it, so you can use joystick and this here to pan it around, tilt it around. And you can also apparently control certain functions of certain cameras. So certain cameras, including my Sony, you'll be able to use the start and stop record button, as well as using this to do things like zoom and manual focus, and that'll connect to the camera over Wi-Fi. So that's pretty smart. Looks like another tripod mount there, so you could possibly mount it on a tripod sideways. Button on the back, lever there. Various mode selection, and a tiny little OLED screen, and that shows readouts. Obviously I'll need to actually read up on that and actually get it working, but yeah, that's a device. And so far, this feels really nicely made. Like, it's all really nice, think aluminium. It just feels like a really good quality bit of kit, which is actually quite impressive, because I was concerned being like the cheapest gimbal, it would be quite poor quality, but it seems okay. So I guess what I'll now do is I'll go away off camera, get it all set up and working, and I'll come back, show how it works, and give my impressions and do some test footage. But so far, I'm pretty impressed with this thing. So now I've been trying the gimbal out for a bit, and now I'm back to give my impressions. And so far, I'm really happy with it. Also, I do apologise if the video quality here isn't as good. Unfortunately, I only actually have one good camera, so I'm having to film this on my phone, because I'm going to be using my good camera to test the gimbal out. So yeah, the video quality might not be quite as good here, and the autofocus seems to be a complete nightmare on this thing. But yeah, hopefully it'll be fine. And yeah, I really like this gimbal. Obviously it's probably not as good as all the high-end, top-of-the-range, really expensive ones, but for the price point, it seems to perform really well and seems to be really good quality. It's definitely a lot better than I was expecting it to be. So what I'll do is I'll show setting the gimbal up, and then we'll go through some of the features of it. So first thing you need to do is obviously mount your camera on it. Now for that, you've just got the standard tripod plate here that you screw to the bottom of the camera. If you wanted to use something like a GoPro or a phone using the phone mount, you would still attach it to this same plate. Or actually, I think you might be able to actually just use this screw through the bottom of the gimbal. You might not need the plate, but yeah, this is how you mount normal cameras onto this little tripod plate thing. So you screw that in, and you've got a few different positions to place the screw, so you can sort of set the camera slightly back, slightly forward, because you do need to balance the gimbal, so you do need to get it sort of fairly well positioned on the gimbal. And it's just really practice based on your camera as to where you balance it. Now you need to attach the camera to the gimbal. Now for balancing the gimbal, you really need to have a sort of tripod to put it on. Now annoyingly it doesn't come with one, but I picked this one up for like £3 on eBay, so it's not a problem. But if you're getting one of these, you probably want to buy a little tripod like this. This is designed for gimbal use, and it folds pretty flat and just sits like that. So it's not designed really for taking photos, it's purely for balancing gimbals. And yeah, you can pick these up for like £3 on eBay, so it's definitely worth buying one. Because what you do is screw that up onto the tripod mount on the bottom of the gimbal, and that will then let you stand the gimbal up, and that's what you need to be able to balance it. Now in order to balance the gimbal, you need to get the axes sort of set up right, so you sort of need to work out which way the gimbal's meant to be going round, so that's... let's see, that way. So you sort of need to roughly figure out which way all the things are meant to go, so it sits roughly right, where the camera bed's sitting completely flat and has a good amount of degree of motion back and forward. Once it's like that, you then want to mount the camera on, which just slides on the back quite easily. And then you've got a good bit of sort of, and then of course you can see now it's hitting the side here. So we now need to try and adjust this the other way. So that's, I think, it's sitting a bit too far sideways on the plate, so loosen that off, slide the camera along, tighten it up again. Once you figure it out, it becomes quite easy. Yep, now the camera's sitting on the plate, it now sits back and forward. So you need to set it so the camera sort of doesn't tilt back and forward by tilting it back a little bit. So you see it's now tilting forward, so you just need to find the right position for it there. With cameras like this, where the lens extends when you turn it on, you want to do it with the camera switched on, so the way it's balanced is how it will be when it's actually being used. And with this camera, I worked out roughly there is the position it needs to be put at. As you can see now, the camera now balances like that. It balances correctly there. but if I were to let go, it would tilt completely sideways. Then all you need to do is adjust these things, where you basically loosen the adjustment off by turning it one way, like that. You can then slide it along, and it's really just a case of just sliding it until the camera is roughly balanced, like that. Now the camera is balanced, you just need to lock it off, like that. And it's balanced on the gimbal and ready to go. Obviously, if there's slight inaccuracies, the gimbal will adjust that when you switch it on, but you don't want to be trying to run the gimbal with a completely unbalanced camera, because it makes motors work a lot harder, it shakes all over the place, and it's not as good. You want to get it pretty well balanced, so when you turn the gimbal on, it keeps the camera fairly level. And that's the gimbal now on and working, so we can move the camera around like that, and it's perfectly balanced. So that's gimbal all set up and running with my camera on it, so now let's try it out. So first thing you need to do is get the camera roughly pointed in position with the gimbal fully balanced, and then turn it on. Hold that button down, gimbal turns on, you'll now see the camera now moves and is now operating on the gimbal where it's being held completely level. The gimbal has a few different modes. So defaults to HF mode. What this means is it holds the camera completely level with the horizon, but if you turn the gimbal, you'll see the camera will also pan round with it. Like that, you can see it's panning left and right. However, if I tilt the camera down, or tilt it up, you'll see the camera remains level with the horizon. Of course, while in any mode you can use the joystick, so you can still tilt it up and down using that. However, it won't do it automatically, and that will also pan it left and right. The other mode you've got is AF. This one will mean that the camera will tilt in all directions. So if you turn it around like that, you'll see it will pan like normal. But this time if I tilt the camera down, you'll see the camera will then point down, and if I tilt the gimbal up, the camera will point up. So it doesn't stay in line with horizon. At first I thought this would be a much more useful mode because I wouldn't have to worry about tilting it, but it actually makes it fiddlier because if you have to hold the gimbal completely vertically. If you're holding it at arm's length and tilting it slightly, the camera will then end up pointing down. On the other hand, if you have it on HF mode, and you want to hold the gimbal at arm's length, the camera will stay pointing horizontally, and then you can fairly easily control the tilt up and down yourself, which is definitely quite easy to do. The third mode is lock, so you put it onto lock mode, and that will lock the camera pointing where it is. So it'll stay level with the horizon, but also it will tilt. If I turn the gimbal round, the camera will not pan. But of course in any mode you can still use the joystick to change direction. There's also very useful fast follow mode. So when you turn it left and right, you'll see the camera will pan round, but it slows itself down to make for a smooth pan. If there's a lot of fast motion, however, you can hold the button on the back, and that'll put it into fast panning mode, so it pans a lot faster, so that's really useful to have. The final option that's really useful is this button on the back. When you press it twice, it'll return the camera to its default position. So if I press that twice there, it will turn the camera around and it will adjust it. So you can try that again, where it's maybe going to be a bit more noticeable. So if I turn it completely around with the joystick, double press that, it'll turn the camera back to where it was. So that's good to get back to your sort of default point of reference. The final mode that's quite handy is if you press the mode button 3 times, it will turn round and face you. So if you're doing some sort of vlogging setup, this is really useful. The only annoying thing I've really found is this mode button, that you have to press it a different number of times. The problem is that different modes on the gimbal require you to press it between 1 and 4 times, but pressing it 5 times resets the factory default settings on the gimbal. So you press the button slightly dodgily and maybe it double counts a press or something, or you just accidentally press it one too many times, you can reset the gimbal, and I've done that a couple of times. It's not the end of the world because there's not that many settings you can change on it, but it is frustrating when you press the button to try and change the mode and it pops up resetting and it's like, no, I didn't want to reset it. So it's definitely that's a little bit annoying, but apart from that, it really works pretty well. As for the motion, it's very smooth, very fluid. It keeps up perfectly well. Obviously, if you try and do things that like put it right to limit, it'll sort of bounce, like obviously you do that there, it can't cope because you're hitting the limits on the motors, but as long as you're sensible, you're okay. The only other thing I really found is when you put something really light like a phone or a GoPro on it, it vibrates a little bit, but if you connect it to the app over Wi-Fi or over Bluetooth to the app, you can change the motor strength settings, and changing them and playing about with them definitely stop the vibration. I think it's because by default it's designed for very heavy cameras like this, so the motors are a bit strong, but you can definitely play about with that, and that definitely fixes that issue. And yeah, it works really well. The other thing this gimbal can do is it can connect certain cameras over Wi-Fi, like the Sony one here, and control certain functions of the camera. It's fairly easy to set up. You just download the Gimbal app, connect to the gimbal over Bluetooth, and then set the Wi-Fi settings up. And now I've got it connected up, it's working. So what I can now do is if I turn this little wheel on the side of the gimbal, that will zoom the camera in and out. Probably can't really make it out because it's just filming a white wall, but that's adjusting the zoom of the camera. So if I zoom out there, you'll see it's zoomed further out. You can also press this button in, and that will then switch it into focus mode, and turn this knob will then adjust the focus of the camera. You can also finally use the little button here to either start and stop recording, or to take photos. However, for me I actually can't use this, because for some reason, this is a Sony problem. On my camera, the Sony a6000, you cannot use the Wi-Fi control app for video recording, only for photos. Other models, the slightly newer ones, do actually do video, so it's more of an issue with the a6000, but it's worth bearing in mind. However, from what I've seen, I don't think I would use this even if my camera supported it. Because for example, for zooming, it zooms in steps. So if I zoom, it's not a smooth zoom. You can see the steps of it zooming. And also there's quite a bit of latency there. There's quite a delay between turning it and the camera reflecting your changes. So what that means, if you're trying to zoom or focus while recording, you're going to end up overshooting and have to then dial it back again, and it's going to look rubbish on video. And that step zooming also looks a little bit rubbish. So I wouldn't rely on that feature anyway, even if you had it. It would be useful for starting and stopping recording, but I probably wouldn't use it for much more than that. However, even though I can't really use the Wi-Fi control, this knob on the side is still really useful. If you hold it in, it'll switch it from camera control mode to gimbal mode, and this will now let you control axes of the gimbal. So now obviously if you use a little joystick, you can turn the gimbal around like normal, but what you can do is you can assign a single axis to this knob and control it independently, which gives you a bit more fine-grained control. So currently if I turn this knob, that will pan the gimbal around side to side. If you press it in, it'll switch to roll control, which will tilt the gimbal like that. You can also control the roll using a little joystick on the rear side of the gimbal as well, or you can assign it to that knob. The final one is you can switch back to camera mode, gimbal mode. You can assign it to tilt control, which lets you tilt the camera up and down. And this is probably my favourite mode of the lot, because when you've got it on HF mode and you need to manually control the tilt, using this knob here feels a lot more precise and a lot more direct than using the joystick. The joystick, you're very much pushing it in a direction, you've not got that much speed control, and you're sort of waiting for it, whereas this almost feels like it's mechanically connected to the tilt of the camera. Not quite, but it's a lot more natural, like it's tilting very much in relation to how much I'm turning this wheel. So that feels a lot more accurate, and I really like that function. So yeah, the controls are actually pretty good. They do take a little bit getting used to, just to try and remember which button does what and which knob does that and which mode you're in and all that sort of stuff. And then trying to just get used to the limits of how far you can tilt it before it goes funny. But when you get to grips with it, it actually works really well. The final mode that I really like is called auto rotation. What this does is let you set 2 points and it will cause the camera to automatically pan between those 2 points over a period of time that you define. So what you do to do that is you press the mode button 4 times, it'll beep, you then point the camera manually into a position that you want it to start in, press the mode button, it beeps, turn the camera around to the next position, press the button again, and it'll go back to the start position, and the camera will then slowly pan from the first position to the second position. You can't really define how the motion works, so it's not super accurate, but it is quite a cool feature. Now what you saw there was a pan over about 30 seconds. However, when you connect this to the app, you can define the time it takes, and that's ranging anywhere from a few seconds to literally hours. So you could set the camera up on a tripod, set it to hours, and have it do a really slow pan while you're doing a time lapse, which could look really cool. So that's a pretty nice feature. It's definitely very niche, but if you wanted to do really cool slow pans while you're doing time lapses, this thing would be ideal for that. And obviously that works for simple pans as well, not complex movement like that. So for example, just do a simple pan, so 1, 2, 3, 4, beep, turn it that way, press it there, turn it around the other way on the same axis, there you go. and then it'll now do a simple slow pan between those 2 points. Like that. So if we take a look at the functionality of the gimbal, we can see that it actually works really well. Now let's take a look at some test footage I took. So here I'm walking down a path with the gimbal in HF mode. So as I turn the gimbal side to side, the camera will pan, but tilting it up and down does not cause the gimbal to tilt up and down. It maintains its level with the horizon. So any tilting it up and down you're seeing here is caused by me using the joystick. So what you're now seeing is the gimbal in AF mode, which looks very similar, but if I were to tilt the gimbal up or down, the camera would pan up and down. At this point I'm holding the gimbal completely level, so you're not really seeing it, but what I was doing when I was having to film this was hold the gimbal completely vertically to stop it tilting, whereas when I was in HF mode I was able to hold the gimbal at arm's length and tilt it slightly and have it maintain its level with the horizon. Neither mode is particularly better than the other, they're really just designed for different things. Here you can see a bit of the test of the 2 modes. So what I was doing here is I was holding the camera out and tilting it down. So the first picture you're seeing is in AF mode. So when I tilt the camera down, the camera points down. This is like if the camera was on a tripod or a selfie stick. When you point the camera down, it follows and also points down. It tilts slightly slower to smooth the motion out, but the camera ends up pointing down. What you're seeing now is the same motion in HF mode. So as you can see, while I am tilting the camera down, the camera maintains its level with the horizon. So instead of pointing down, it just becomes lower, like off the ground, but still pointing the same direction. Here's another test of it in HF mode. So as you can see, I'm walking out, but this time I do pan the camera up towards the castle slightly using the joystick, which is easy enough to do. You've got to be a bit careful not to make it too fast or make the acceleration too noticeable, but it does work pretty well. And as you can see, the motion is extremely smooth. I'm not making any real effort to walk particularly smoothly, I'm just walking normally, and there's very little up and down motion in the video. It really smooths it out a lot. As a comparison here, you can see I'm taking this shot here where I'm walking down this path holding the camera on the gimbal. And as you can see, the motion is extremely smooth. Now if we cut to the exact same scene where I'm holding the camera in my hands, with both hands trying to keep it as steady as possible, you can see it's nowhere near as stable. This camera has optical image stabilization, but it's nowhere close to what the gimbal can do. So yeah, for walking and moving about, the gimbal massively stabilizes the footage. Now finally, let's take a look at this in some sort of vlogging scenario. So this is a test of it in a sort of vlogging setup, so I'm just sort of walking, holding it out in front of me. It's a bit heavy, but it's not too bad. It does definitely weigh on your arm a little bit, but it's not the worst thing in the world. And you can of course swap hands without sort of affecting the video too much, which is quite good. And then if you pan around, you'll be a bit careful not to sort of go out of shot because it will pan a bit slower than you're turning. Although you can use the sort of fast follow button on the back to help with that. And yeah, it seems to work quite well. Yeah, sort of walk along. Do another turn here, this time using the fast follow button. And that causes it to pan around a little bit quicker than before. And yeah, it's pretty good. Now unfortunately this camera doesn't have a screen that faces me, so I can't actually see what I'm doing right now. Obviously if you're vlogging properly, you'd probably have a camera with a reversible screen or an external display. I don't have that here because I don't normally do this, but yeah, it seems to work pretty well. So there you go. That's a look at the G6 Plus gimbal from FeiyuTech. And I'm really impressed with it. Sure, it's not the fanciest gimbal in the world, but for around 250 quid for a gimbal that can take mirrorless cameras like this, it actually works really well. Performance seems really good. I've not got a huge amount of experience to compare it to, but it seems to work absolutely perfectly for my needs. It seems really well made. I'm definitely very happy with it. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. And if you're interested in purchasing this, there's links in the video description. Thanks for watching.